I want to get to what we're here for, which is these lovely people that are kind of leaning on each other a little bit over there. I guess they know each other pretty well. And so we want to say that this is a fascinating way that they introduce their next book, which is a continuation of their UX books, but they've kind of recognized that something has changed. And that's kind of exciting to have somebody really actually be willing and able to change with changing technology. And these people have illustrious careers. We heard about the possibility of learning about working on UX in government from Elizabeth. Mike, well, I don't know. He's a little more secretive about what he's been doing, but he's in a AI risk company, and I think you're probably one of the founders, aren't you?
Yeah. It's a complex, ever fluid situation with the startup founding situation.
As startups can be. So without much ado, I will turn it over to you, and I hope you guys look up next month's talk also, and let me stop sharing so you guys can do your thing.
Okay, is that working? Oh, right. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to talk about essentially there are a lot of talks about UX and AI and design and AI and research and asterisk AI. We wanted to talk about something a little bit different. This came out, and we'll talk more about this. This came out of our work writing a book. And what we want to talk about today is generally not going to be the how-to.
There will be some how-to.
There's a little bit of how-to, but like there's a million blogs that'll tell you, like you can watch TikToks about how to make workflows with blah, blah, blah. That's not our thing, at least not today. What we wanted to talk about was essentially some larger trends that we had observed. Liz, do you want to?
Yeah, so I'm going to move us along to, oh, by the way, yes, that is a mortar and pestle. And we will get to why there's mortar and pestle later. Just keep that in the back of your head.
By the way,
as you grind through the talk.
So for those of you who are on the live stream and not in the room, we'll reintroduce ourselves. My name is Elizabeth Goodman. Please call me Liz now that you've met me. I'm a researcher and service designer, first for corporate R&D in the 2000s. And then the past 10 plus years, I've worked in government digital services. I have a PhD from UC Berkeley's School of Information. I'm happy to talk to anybody about the whys and wherefores of getting a PhD and working for the government. And I'm now focused primarily on health and human services. You can click the link and find me on LinkedIn. Mike?
Thanks. So I didn't expect to be, but I became kind of a creature of Silicon Valley. So I've been working here for a long time. The gray hairs, the beard tell you that. So I've worked essentially at the bleeding edge of kind of design and whatever the bleeding edge technology is. I spent a bunch of time in the web when that was new. Then I spent a whole bunch of time in what is now called the IoT, Internet of Things, or whatever, embedded systems, and when that was new. And then I've spent the last 10 years working in AI. I was the head of design at Xerox PARC for a while. And then I moved to running an R&D lab that was focused on cognitive science and on AI at Accenture. And then I did AI benchmarking for risk and safety. And now I have essentially now I'm down to one startup that is focused on AI native design tools. And we're married.
You should know that. Probably.
You've said it a few times.
Yeah.
But it's pretty important. Can you move to the next slide?
Yes, of course.
So two things. We're probably going to interrupt each other. This will be very conversational. And we're going to give you as far as we can, like the straight talk. So for example, why we wrote the same book 4 times, 3 editions, 4 rewrites. So to that end, let's talk about, next slide.
Okay,
This was the first one. We're
so
about to go to observing user experience. We're calling it 3-ish. It's technically speaking the 3rd edition.
so yeah, do you want to talk
Yes,
about how
the
this is?
book is a product of and documents kind of a different age in UX as a profession, and particularly research as a profession. And the first edition was 2003.
Yeah,
That was just Mike.
yeah,
And I'm going to talk for you. Mike wanted to document kind of what he had learned on the job, right? User research was a relatively new title that you could have in a real company at that point. And I'm going to be honest and say that you kind of felt like you wanted to organize what you had learned into a digestible form for yourself.
yeah.
And then share it with other people so that they could avoid learning by trial and error and the way you had.
Yeah.
And he wanted to kind of spare people that same pain of taking your undergrad research, your undergrad degree in computer science and turning it into a job. Second edition, 2012, was largely me. At that point, I was teaching for my PhD. I had had a job. I had had multiple jobs in UX research. I knew it was a job. I knew that I had students. I wanted to help them learn and grow. And I was really focused on how to update the book so that it did that thing. That's the slightly more colorful version. Then we intended to do the 3rd version in 2019, and we thought it would come out in 2021. And we did not anticipate the pandemic. And we lost more than a year to parenting during the pandemic. And by the time we came out of that, it was late 2022, and we thought we were done with the update. So this is the 3rd rewrite. We're feeling good. And
But it's 1,000 pages.
It's 1,000 pages, by the way.
Like, just so you know, we really wrote a lot.
We really wrote a lot. There were a lot of changes to integrate. And then in November 2022, ChatGPT came out. And by the 2023, we realized that we needed to completely rewrite all 1,000 pages because everything had changed. And so we did it again, a 4th time, in order to accommodate what we now knew to be the best possible advice we could give. And now it's in the hands of publishers.
Well, it's in the hands of our publisher, who is being, because this is being recorded, we love our publisher.
Publisher.
Who's Elsevier, and they're a wonderful large organization, and we're hoping to hear when they're actually going to publish this very soon.
This has given us time to really reflect on the process and what we went through and how the world is changing. So this is our 3 connected topics that we're going to go through today, which is essentially how AI works. Like, what is it doing to the day-to-day work of user research? And we're not going to go through the entire book, but we'll give you like a taste. Then we also want to talk about what we see as some of the background industry power dynamics that are changing what we do, what we did as a job. And really as a discipline. So it's kind of interconnected. We're going to split them into 3 parts, but I hope at the end we'll sort of bring it home as this kind of cycle, this interconnected world. What that means is essentially, maybe back in the physical world is finally happening. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's changing how we work. And so Mike is going to take you through what we really think is like happening right now.
Yeah. So one of the things we're not going to get deep into, but one of the things we also discussed a lot when we were rewriting it for the 4th time was like, why do we why are we writing a book at all? Like, what is the whole point? Like, are we just making training data for AI? Is anyone going to read it? Are students actually ever going to, like, students don't read things, they don't get signed things, if they don't get consumed, maybe it'll be read, and I'm like, what is the point? What we wanted to do is we wanted to actually, for ourselves and for people, we wanted to go through and talk about what it is that is changing and how it's changing. We interviewed a bunch of people. We interviewed, I can't remember, 20-some people about this, and tried to distill that into some things. I'm not going to talk about very much about the mechanics of how to use AI with user experience research. Like I said, there's plenty of content for that online, but let me kind of give you a high level of what's happening. So, hold on, can
Yeah.
I bring this in? Because
Yeah, now Mike has to read the speaker notes.
I have to read the speaker. So we have, for those of you who are online, we have 2 computers. I can see only the slides. Liz can see only the speaker notes. Thank you, Google Slides. So,
And what's on the phone?
so on the phone is our timer, so that we actually know how long we're talking. So, so one of the things we did is we actually dropped a bunch of methods from the 3rd edition, and we looked at what, like I said, what are people actually doing? And so let me just give you a very, very quick roll of like all the different ways that AI really in the last 24 months, in the last 36 months has completely changed, or has largely changed the way that UX practice is happening. So we used to have an entire thing about how to do transcription. Transcription is now free. You should transcribe everything. Every single thing should be transcribed, right? Like it used to be expensive. There used to be an entire way, okay, whatever, it's free. So preliminary analysis of those transcripts is now also much easier. You throw it all into Notebook LM, you query Notebook LM, you get summaries, they can be coded, you're not having to do laborious coding, you can, it goes back to ground truth.
Great.
You can do automatic video editing. You can do things in multiple languages because everything's translated more or less.
I know there's a translator in the room. We all know it's not that easy.
But for certain things, yes. You can look at, like, if you want to find out about translation allows you to watch an unboxing video from Romania and understand exactly what the experience is just by watching it on YouTube and turning on translation. Like, it's like that was not possible until quite recently. You can now do that. So AI can write pretty good discussion guides, at least first rounds. It can write pretty good protocols. It can give you okay first drafts of survey questions. Always review the survey questions, but it can give you that. All that stuff used to be really laborious. We had all this stuff in the and I think one of the most you can use AI to help yourselves debrief. You can have AI interview you. You can have AI ask your group questions. You can so that you articulate that in a way that you're not going to if you're just sitting around trying to come up with, okay, what is it that we learned? So all of this stuff is now great. And moreover, thanks to things like Lovable, you can now make prototypes of ideas super fast to test them with people, like things that are so much more interactive, so much more functional, so much so much higher fidelity in the user experience way than you were able to until it
sounds like an ad for Figma Make here, but I watched someone use Figma Make to work on content architecture live and come up with like multiple directions in a usability test to see what would play better with a like massive corpus of documents that were pretty wonky. And it basically worked. Like I wouldn't go live with it, what we came out with, but like that was totally great for eliciting really, really helpful feedback.
Yeah. First drafts are easy now. First drafts of anything are easy. All right. So that's the great part. Let's just point out the other part. So AI has essentially made has made participant fraud hyperscale, right? So you used to, like, I'm not going to wax nostalgic about ye olde days of the mid-20 teens. And where you'd have to like look at like the pre-pandemic days, like where you'd have to like evaluate. Sorry, you were going to say something.
I was going to
Okay.
point out that this is where remote research and automated research are kind of really come in to the fore as facilitators of fraud at a massive scale.
Yep.
Meeting people in person used to at least guarantee that there was like a real person who had to do some work to meet you at a real cafe. And even if they were going to lie to you, at least they had to try.
Yep.
Now people can just run fake personas. They can show up as a human.
Yep.
Use ChatGPT to create fake answers. So you think you're talking on video to this is a real story in the book of a guy who thought that he was talking to a real investment broker in Malaysia. And it turned out that he doesn't know who he was talking to, but that was not an investment broker and they were not in Malaysia.
Because what they were doing is they were reading off of another screen. They were reading chat. They were listening to the questions that the interviewer was asking, transcribing them into another screen with ChatGPT, having that answered as if they were an investment broker, and then reading those answers off onto the screen. Like,
I admire the ingenuity.
that's hustle.
Yeah.
And
For us as researchers, like that destroys the validity of our work.
yeah.
And so I'm sort of think of this, some of the methods as like zero trust
Yep.
identity checking. So just like there's zero trust security where you don't assume that a single check is going to keep your system secure. A lot of researchers we talked to really advocated for just continuously, like, is the person really in Malaysia? If they were in Malaysia, they would probably know what the weather is right now in Malaysia. So why don't you ask them what the weather's like?
Yep.
If they're really an investment broker, they should probably be concerned about recent fluctuations in the markets. Drop in a question. Are you worried right now? Stuff that is harder to fake. And that's what we mean about asking harder questions. Hey,
So just in the newspapers, they is Smile, and they are making fake people to do the testing for.
Yeah, we
You're
talk about
gonna
simile.
get to that.
You're gonna get to
Talk
that.
about
We're getting there.
Yeah.
And then the other point, which is just good practice anyway, is actually adding friction.
Yep.
Don't pay people automatically.
Oh.
Obviously, do not pay them in Bitcoin, but don't pay people automatically. Add kind of air gaps between key steps so that it's harder for a bot to just click, 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 click all the way through.
Survey research is basically screwed unless you put in a bunch of
Yes.
other friction that makes it.
Yes.
It sounds like it's becoming more and more expensive to make this actual research. So why don't we go back to the old times in that sense, like with real people locally?
You can absolutely do that. One of the things, so the question was like, why don't we go back to just working with people locally? Absolutely do that. We recommend video, like you schedule a Zoom call, right? You schedule a Zoom, and that makes it harder. The one great benefit of all of the AI and all of the tools since the pandemic has been that you can do work asynchronously, you can do work remotely, you can do work in a semi-automated way. And that greatly lowers the cost. So you have to do a cost-benefit analysis of like what, but yes.
Yes. Let's get on to Ted's excellent question.
Okay, so I made this chart today, and so we
Oh, yeah.
we have
We do have some.
we have. So you can see it's a 2x2 grid, right? You now have this situation where we have both synthetic users and synthetic researchers, and both. So where is that useful? And so there are a bunch of useful things that you can do with this. So for example, with synthetic users, you can pre-test a bunch of stuff, questions. You can evaluate where, like you can test edge cases and ask for personas that are really hard to recruit, and you can get some information from that you wouldn't be able to get by just actually finding people. You can you can preserve people's privacy when you want to talk about something that's really sensitive or really difficult. Like when it's always a cost benefit analysis. When it's really hard to recruit for that, this is a way to get something.
Or if you're doing research that involves trauma or extremely stigmatized or sensitive behaviors, even if you are going to talk to real people, like maybe consider talking to a chatbot first before trying out your new questions on real people who have real emotions.
Yes. The downside is that you're not gonna get any, like, one of the uses that we talk about, one of the uses for user research is internally in organizations to essentially further your to further empathy for specific audiences. Simulated users aren't gonna bring you any empathy. Like the stakeholders that might have been swayed by an interview don't give a crap about ChatGPT users. You might be able to use it, but they won't. So also, they're still kind of sycophantic. They want to please you. They don't want to, like, you can tell them not to, but they still want to do that. All right, simulated researchers. So simulated researchers are essentially, basically you can have an AI run a interview for you. You can have it run a usability test for you. They ask real human beings, AIs ask the questions. This is a way for you to scale your capabilities so that it's not just you who have to do all the question asking. You can get something to ask a bunch of questions. You get a bunch of transcripts and videos. You can then analyze them the way that you would analyze it. Challenge with that, of course, is that you're not there to adapt. You're not there to interpret. You're not there to evaluate. But it's great. It can be really helpful. The last one is the simulated users with simulated researchers quadrant. There aren't that many things in this, but like Yuxia, however you pronounce that, Yuxia. So they essentially do kind of simulated usability testing. You point your website at them, they will like do simulated user research, and then they will like simulated usability on it, and then they like do automated analysis of that simulated usability, and then they tell you some things about your product. Totally useful as a first cut, as with many things. I would not necessarily exactly bet the farm on them.
What we will see throughout this talk, by the way, is that Mike really likes using AI tools and I really don't. So the two of us together balance out to one
more or less
reasonable person.
No, actually, no. It's like I just reduce your reasonableness.
Once again,
so,
we're married.
But there's a reason why I'm the one with the AI startups.
So there's a quick question about synthetic users, right? So if you're recommending using them for hard to recruit populations, and they're powered by LLMs that are biased by Western and majority group discourse, how do you balance that?
Well, it depends on what kind of hard to population. Like if you you can still have like you're absolutely right. So the question is if the simulated user is using a language model, or really now it's a frontier model that's going to be multimodal, that is Western, how do you avoid Western biases when doing and so I think you're right. You have to be careful about that. It's about, again, interpreting the results that you get, having somebody who actually can actually interpret, like someone who knows whether an answer is legitimate sounding, actually read the results and say, okay, the way that we are prompting this particular persona is not generating something that I would consider to be reasonable. One of the ways that you can, to some extent, this is not, if you prompt or if you do the entire thing in the language, if it's not English, the models tend to be a little bit more culturally accurate. And so, but there's a ton of, yeah.
What I would say is that my sort of cut on it as someone who took all the research methods classes, is that if you have a hard to research population that nonetheless produces an extraordinary amount of internet text, like people who have an extremely rare disease and are very online because they want to find other people with that rare disease, you're probably going to get better results than if you're trying to use this technique with a hard to recruit for population that is not very online, or that does not produce. Online is, for me, is sort of a shorthand for produces data that is typically brought into these corpuses. And so getting back to your point, I think language communities are a really interesting case that I don't know how to deal with just yet, because clearly, for example, there should be massive amounts of Chinese language content that should turn relatively what I think of as a hard to recruit for population into something that is, oh God, what a terrible word to say, I'm sorry, consumable or digested by these frontier models. However, am I culturally competent?
Yeah.
No. What I do and what I have done and do is I go to someone who is culturally competent, who is fluent, who is a native speaker, ideally, hopefully from the same general region, and have them do that work for me.
When I was making a benchmark with ML Commons, this is about a year ago, and I was making a benchmark for measuring AI risk, which involved essentially asking questions in a number of different languages to see if the models would produce something that was a violation of one of the different parameters. We constructed all of our questions such that we had language experts review all of our questions, because there's nuance that we can use translate, we can translate anything. And our initial corpus was all translated, but then we hired people who are regionally, and you can also do that online now, which is great, who are regionally capable to review what we were asking to make sure that it was actually meant what we thought that it was supposed to mean. So,
and this gets back to the why we need traditional research, or why certain kinds of traditional skills are still, and methods are still really valuable. We still need to speak the correct language. Yes.
There's some questions on Zoom popping up.
Oh.
So if you guys want to give a look.
So in the interest of time, we have a bunch of, I would say, if it really can't wait, send it to Edwin, and Edwin will
ask it.
We'll ask it. Otherwise, we have a bunch of slides we want to get through, and then you can ask questions later.
Sorry.
Also, we may end up answering your questions albeit by talking very, very fast.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we wanted to also say, is there still room for traditional, quote unquote, traditional user research, like user research the way it was practiced 10 years ago?
In the oldie days.
In the oldie days of
T12, when I was so excited.
Yes, maybe even as far as 2016. So yes. I mean, this is where we're talking about ground truth. You need to gather ground truth. You need to gather ground truth on a regular basis which may be just once a year, in order to validate that all of the other tools are actually producing things that dovetail with what people who are you want to be your audience or you want to use your tools actually say. You like. Again, in the first 2 editions of this book, we were like, leave the building. We're like, now we're like, you're not gonna have time to leave the building. Maybe once a year, leave the building.
Like remote work and, augmentation of your existing
Yes.
capabilities. We're not saying don't do this. We're just saying that in the actual organizations that we work within, with the actual expectations that we have, we still need traditional research, but we have to figure out how to argue for it and explain why you got to do it. And, one of the things we always want to point out is that, and we just went through talking about this, that like frontier models have real capability limits. Like, I love that you're going to have a talk about AI and consciousness. Like, we're not trying to get all woo-woo about like humans and how special it is to be a human in the world, but it kind of is. Like, there are real things that are not encoded.
I was totally shaking my head as you were saying that.
I know you were. There we go.
No.
But pointing out, shut up, Mike. But is that frontier models do not contain all of the relevant data. They just don't. You can be as optimistic as Mike is and still be very clear that technologically speaking, you get out a frontier model, what you put into it, and the whole of our experienced reality is just not going to be put into it for 2 reasons. One is the types of data that typically get in there. And then 2 is just time.
Yep.
The world is changing far too quickly for a frontier model to just always be up to date on every single niche topic that you could ever possibly imagine. Particularly, again, if you work with communities that are not terribly internet-y.
I'm really curious about it. Why not? Why could not keep up with it?
Well, I mean, so there are technical limitations in terms of training, but those are going away. There is a distinguishing between real and fake information that's still going on. So I know, maybe this is apocryphal, but I heard through somebody who I basically trust, that there's a person who is a professional journalist who works full-time as a journalist, who has the audience of 1, which is a frontier model. They work as a journalist for the frontier model in order to be able to sift through everything that's going on, in order to be able to say, okay, this is real information, this is not real information. Maybe that's a temporary job. Hopefully the person will still be able to have a real job. But I think that, but also there's a lot of information that's not on there. There's information about like, okay, you can figure out like what the current TikTok trends for 12-year-olds are pretty easily, but can you figure out how actual 12-year-olds in Northern California respond to those TikTok trends? It's really hard because there's this tidal wave of information that's irrelevant to the question that you're asking, and you still need to be able to ask that question. So that's that's where you need to go and get that information. You need to go out and actually, or bring in and ask that person. Mixed methods is also still hard. Like some of these are just, you kind of want a person there, like when you want to moderate a discussion. And sometimes, and sometimes it's just difficult. Like mixed methods is hard. Like we just don't have, maybe that's somebody's startup, a good mixed methods user research AI tool yet.
So, and the last thing, which we'll return to, is kind of what we think of as the social contract of synthesis. That the point of getting together, like let's say we all get together and we make a journey map and we're bringing together a bunch of different sources. Some of those are the first-hand understanding of people who might be in the room. I do a lot of enterprise research, so I'm often doing it with the people who are the sources. Maybe it's other people who aren't themselves your users, but who have some sort of belonging in the process of constructing the product. The process of doing the work is of doing the synthesis is of all of us agreeing in conversation that we all stand behind this thing, or at the very least are willing to not complain about it too much outside of this group. And that we've made there's the apocryphal, not quite true, Betty Crocker story about how you have to put the egg into the cake mix, which turns out to unfortunately be not true. But it's a good story. Such a
We'll
good
tell you later, Ted.
We'll tell you later. I was doing this talk and realized, and I was doing historical research when I wanted to use this analogy, and I realized that it was not in fact true, like so many great stories. I'm still going to use the analogy. Like, there is a social contract that goes into making a thing together. And if you don't make the thing together, do you still get the same level of commitment and agreement to the decisions that come out of that thing? That's our issue. Let's go on.
Okay,
All right.
here, move forward so I know what it is I'm supposed to say here. So what we ended up with the book explicitly stepping back, because there's a lot of stuff that was going on at the same time when we were rewriting the book last year. And we wanted to talk about how UX and UX researchers' roles have changed. And to do that, what we needed to do is we wanted to step back and say, okay, what is the role that UX researcher and UX researchers, and broadly speaking, a lot of different kinds of roles had in organizations. And in order for us to do that, we had to talk about power dynamics, specifically the power dynamics in organizations. And in order to, where that goes here, let's talk about this. And so, so I love Lewis Mumford. If any of you have never read Lewis Mumford's work, he was a big mid-20th century intellectual that talked about urbanism, talked about technology. He actually started talking about automation in the 1930s when he was looking back at like the early 20th century. By 1970, he wrote this quote, which was explicitly in reference to cybernetics. Which was explicitly reference to a number of different things, including kind of the role that technology plays in authoritarianism, those kinds of things. So what we want to say is that what we're seeing is not new right now. The thing that all of the angst that's on LinkedIn about, is this the death of design? Will any engineers have jobs in the future? All of that angst, we're not saying that that's not true. It's absolutely good questions to ask. They're just not unique to our time. They've been true for 150 years, just in different contexts. We're just now seeing this context. And specifically, what we're seeing is that knowledge work is now becoming like factory work was. And anything that is automatable is being automated. And so what Mumford was essentially saying, do we have another? Okay. What Mumford was essentially saying is that if you do something more than once as part of your job, odds are is that you're going to be automated out of a job.
That being said, I'd also like to point out that this is my second time being automated out of a job, because I came of age in the 90s and I trained as a graphic designer. And for those of you who remember the onslaught of Adobe PageMaker, that was horrible. It just destroyed my career progression. So I want to be clear that like this happens again and again and again. And if you are on the outside, you look at these awesome new tools and you think, this is so amazing. From my personal perspective, from my egocentric perspective, what an amazing extension of my capabilities in the world. I have new realms that I can explore. And if you're the person whose job is whose identity is being automated away, it feels terrible. Like, it felt really bad to have people pick up Kai's power tools, which I know dates me, and say, ooh, I'm a cool graphic designer now. It's like, oh my God, I was supposed to be paid to do this. And now anyone can buy it for whatever, $19.99 off the shelf of the store. So what we are going to say here is that AI is part of this transformation, but it is a symptom, not a cause. The idea that there is sort of technologically determinist idea that there is this independent force called AI, which rushes through the world and like a hurricane and transforms everything in its path, is okay, not totally wrong, but is also not thinking clearly about necessarily kind of the larger swath of what we've seen in the tech industry and power dynamics in the tech industry. And so I'm going to take a pretty standard sociological view and talk about power as kind of the ability to shape the world. Power is both kind of, it's not an abstract question here. Like, we can see it in observable day-to-day experience in terms of relevance. So what questions or topics are treated as salient by members of your organization, or even comprehensible? Like, if you show up a meeting and you say something about responsible AI, everybody looks at you as if you have talked about purple AI or bananas AI or Prada AI, right? That means that you've said something that is profoundly outside the scope of what is accountable or thinkable. That's power. Power kind of excludes stuff from our thinkability. It's also about reward and rejection. So what sorts of actions in your industry or organization will get you a bigger salary or a fancy title or a chance to speak in front of a group of people at a place like this? Sometimes you also get rejected. You do something that you think is going to work out and it doesn't. And then, of course, resource distribution. So who or what is allocating the rewards and the rejections? Like, who gave you that bigger salary or that fancy title, or gave you the look of, what are you talking about, Liz? And then had everybody else in the table turn to you and give you that same look. I will tell you why I'm saying this, because when I was a researcher at a large corporation that shall remain unnamed, periodically I would say something at a table full of computational economists, and they'd all give me that, you have just made a statement that does not compute look. And I realized that, again, like, I frankly didn't have that much power, and I had just made a statement that was just going to disappear from the record. It was like I never said it.
So we put this chart in here. I just wanted to call it
Clear.
So this is layoffs FYI, for those people who follow it, like basically it tracks layoffs in the tech industry. Most of those layoffs have nothing to do with AI. And as you can see, like even recently, like the bump isn't that huge because of AI. The layoffs are happening because there's other things that are going on in the industry that are causing there to be ebbs and flows and decisions. And those people are going to get laid off, and someone's going to make a decision to lay them off, regardless of what technology is going on or how that is happening. There's a big lump in there that's about moving. Now that we have Zoom, we can move all of these expensive people from North America, or you can move their work elsewhere. There's lots of people all over the world. They're available 24 hours a day. We can move their work. So we lay off everybody in America. Great. That has nothing to do with AI. It has nothing to do with Zoom. It has everything to do with a set of decisions that are happening about how those organizations value that work.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I know you said no questions to the end, but do you think that AI is somewhat responsible for the lack of new jobs and actually the loss of jobs recently in America?
Excellent question. I believe you have queued up our next slide. So basically, if you look at so Is this my slide?
Yeah, you can say
Okay,
it.
thanks.
Our slide.
Yeah, like, we both kind of wrote parts of this. So, if you look at historical automation versus current automation, you see a similar pattern. So historic automation, and like, I don't know if you're familiar with the 3D framework in robotics. So the 3D framework in robotics is that where do you use a robot? In work that is dirty or dangerous or dull. Like that's where automation gets used. Now we're seeing, this is our framework, what we're calling the 3E. Like, where do you see AI automation happening? It's where organizations feel that something is expensive or it's external. It's like not part of their culture, or that it is extraneous. It doesn't fit their what they need right now. Well, what kind of work is that in knowledge work? Well, it's perhaps the work that a person who does research, we call a researcher, does. Or a person who writes code, we call that person an engineer, what that person does. Or a person who makes the UI, we call that person an interaction designer, does. So all of these things can be seen as extraneous or expensive. And so thus, they are prime for automation. And so basically, like you can put a bunch of other stuff in here. You can put law in here. You can put, there's a bunch.
I have my story about the 1990s. For a whole lot of people, the work that was central to my vision of my life was expensive. You had to hire a special person and they cost money and it took time to work with them.
And their tools were expensive.
And their tools were expensive. And their degrees were expensive. That 20 years that they spent learning how to be a graphic designer's very expensive commitment.
Their egos were also expensive.
That is a judgment that I think is actually not accurate about either designers or other people. I think that seriously, like Ted, I think you have a chip on your shoulder about graphic designers.
No, it's not a graphic designer. Everybody has an ego.
Yes, everybody has an ego.
Everybody has an ego. I will say that as like a 19-year-old, I didn't have that much of an ego. I was pretty clear where I was in the world, and it was like this big. But I could also see where I was external, right? Like to work with me, you had to have handoffs, you had to have meetings, you had to have series of reviews. I would sort of go off and do something and I'd come back. There'd have to be a communication, and that I was also kind of extraneous. Like my clients didn't really see my skills as completely necessary to their success. I was kind of a person they could hire to support them, and then I would go away.
They wanted the end result. They didn't want necessarily to talk to you, so to speak.
No, you're right. I mean, yes, exactly that. And I didn't take offense at it.
Right.
I just knew that that was what my place was in like the world of book publishing. I design the book cover and then I go away and let the editors do the thing that they really care about, which is making the deal to buy the next Harry Potter. True story. Mm-hmm. So who defines what is expensive or what is external or what is extraneous is very contextual.
Okay. So, ironically, yeah, can you move that forward?
Yeah.
So this is our, ironically, there's actually a lot more user research than there was a while back. There's a lot more user research, but there are in fact fewer researchers. And one of the ways in our work that we did this, I kind of mapped this out. This isn't a very accurate chart, but I kind of mapped this out. If you look at the last 20 years, like the first 10 years, you can see that from 2006 to 2016, kind of like basically the realm of the first edition of our book, roughly speaking, kind of the roles don't change. Like user researchers are doing user research, they're going out and doing usability testing, they're doing contextual inquiry, they're doing but increasingly, the length of time that they have to do that shrinks. So they used to have, maybe if they were lucky a couple months, Then it became a couple of weeks, maybe it became a month. And that's where you see, for those of you who are around back in the oldie days, you see the rise of discount methods. Like there's this entire thing, guerrilla usability. That you see all this. Where is that coming from? That's all coming from because of the pressure, the time pressure, because these organizations are essentially saying we want the same or more in a shorter amount of time because they want
They don't research at all.
right, because they want the end result. They don't want to talk to you about it. They want the end result. So then in 2016, you actually start seeing this other shift, which is that UX research shifts from UX researchers. This is where the role change happens. The role is now changing from user researchers to, and this is Liz's term.
It's not my term, it's the industry term. I was shocked to discover that it was an actual industry term. It's people who do research.
Why am I getting an echo?
Yeah.
Someone needs to mute.
I did it. I muted.
Okay, so people who do research. So who are people who do research? They're product managers, front-end developers, they're designers, customer success teams. Like they're all doing research, but they want essentially to do their research faster and faster and faster. And so their windows for doing that are shrinking and shrinking. And as they're shrinking, the role of the researcher, like there is no longer
Dedicated researcher.
the role of the dedicated researcher essentially starts to vanish. And it starts to vanish because the research is becoming embedded into the culture. On the one hand, that's a good thing. On the other hand, it means that that specific siloed set of competencies that have a title is going away and vanishing. Now, that same set of competencies is what is being automated through AI. So that same set of things is what's being automated through. So you know, I didn't want to continue the line any further because it'll get really sad.
Yes. Well, let's move on to this. Keep going on with the sad part. Are there still careers in research? This is, we're going to try and answer this ourselves. It's also a question for you all.
There's somebody hiring
There's
here, so
somebody
at
who's
least
hiring.
one career.
Here, I'm actually hiring two, although I'd argue that I hire fewer and fewer researchers, or people who are exclusively researchers, and more people who are service designers.
Yep.
Or generalists. Yeah, exactly.
Wait, Ted, you don't like service designers either? What counts as legitimate for you, Ted?
So I actually back in the oldie days of about 2018, switched my professional affiliation on all of my business cards and LinkedIn and everywhere to service design. And that was for a bunch of reasons, but largely because I felt that as a researcher, I would have less and less power. We just talked about power to shape the world to the way that I thought it should be for the best outcomes for everybody. And that if I were a service designer or a design lead, I would have a lot more power. Admittedly, I would not have as much power as product managers and engineers at that time, but realistically speaking, am I going to become a hardware engineer? No, I am not. So I took the path that I could see working for me.
Yeah, I don't know if we're probably going to talk about this later, hopefully. Don't get too attached to titles.
Talk about that later.
Yeah.
Let's talk about career progression and what it was, what it is. Okay, so this is coming from us as people who have been around the block for a while, who wrote this book 4 times and who have been teachers, mentors. We still show up at universities and do crits. So traditionally, guild career progression, not just for research, but for a lot of fields, like my favorite, graphic design and then interaction design, was kind of guild-like. You started off as a beginning researcher, an apprentice. People told you what to do. You had direct management. Then you became kind of a mid-level lead or manager, AKA a journeyman. still working under the guidance of a head of research. And you could kind of look at your life and see it kind of moving up that hill or up that ladder. Or you could become an independent consultant, which is what Mike did.
Yes.
And people are still doing this, and you learn to hustle. There is no ladder, there is just you and your ability to bring in clients. That is also a completely reasonable career that worked for a lot of people for a very long time. Today, what we're seeing for at least the guild structure is that it is disappearing. What you see is entry-level people wearing multiple hats. Sorry to the entry-level people who are watching this, or congratulations to the entry-level people who are watching this. And product managers are taking over that mid-level journeyman sphere where they are directing work and probably still doing some of it themselves. And then a very small number of very, very experienced senior people.
And
I'm lucky enough generationally to be one of those senior people.
the challenge is that it's unclear whether there are going to be any more senior people ever again, because there's no trajectory.
If you cut out the role of middle managers, or I shouldn't say middle managers, it's pejorative. I mean, like the mid-level guys, like the leads who've been doing this for, let's say, 7 to 10 years, how do those people become senior? And then how do the entry-level people get the coaching that they need to do the work? That is a, frankly, mystery to us right now.
Yeah, we wish we had clear guidance for all of you, and we wish all of you luck in that trajectory, but we don't know.
Here's what we do know.
So, thanks. This looks different than when so ground truth is still gold. So ground truth is the thing that researchers or people who are doing research are going to be able to bring to the table that nobody else can. That they can essentially find that ground truth. And the importance of ground truth is that it validates all of the other things. Like that's when we talk about essentially deliverables as contracts, every deliverable is a contract that essentially says, I stand behind this research. And thus, like the physical deliverable, do we have that anymore? Anyway, whatever.
Our contract.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So the physical deliverable is not nearly as important as the contractual relationship that it represents. The physical deliverable, like whatever that is, whether it's a design or it's research, like that is not nearly as important from an organizational standpoint as the fact that it says, I made this, I have truth behind this, I will stand behind this, and this documents the fact that I did all of this work to stand behind this thing. So an AI cannot do that by definition right now.
If we decide that AIs are human, or at least have human standing, then maybe they can.
But unfortunately, like right now, you with all those AI tools that I showed you, the way that you fire one of them is you get a different AI tool. You don't teach it to do its job better. Like there isn't this and you can't say, hey, that was not what we'd agreed yet. We can't have that.
My story about the AI, is this sort of the AI prototyping that was used in this usability test. In that case, sure, there's a deliverable in there. There was an actual information architecture articulated as a set of menus and a set of metadata tags that was made. Not very competently coded, but that's okay. We have actual people who will do that. What was important is that there was someone in the meeting who is a senior manager who could look at that content and look at the researcher and say, yeah, that's way better than the thing you came in here with. I like that. I can use that. I see how this is going to play out in my work. That is what is going to allow us to move forwards, not the okay, but frankly kind of half-assed code that underlies
Yeah, absolutely.
the prototype.
And so the last thing is that if we're going to give you any advice, is that you have to be aware of the power dynamics in the organizations that you're working in, no matter what those organizations, no matter what those relationships are, because your job as a person in this system is to use your identity as someone who can stand behind the ground truth in order to be able to sell the idea, to be able to broadcast the idea, to be able to stand behind whatever is happening. And
Coffee with the people
To
to
have-
make the decision.
yes.
The chatbot will not go out and have coffee with the person who needs to make the decision.
So one of the concepts, and I'm not going to belabor this point, you'll be able to read the book. One of the concepts that I talk about is information velocity. So measure how fast the information that you have produced as a researcher is making its way through the organization, and try to maximize that. Your name doesn't necessarily even have to be attached to it. You just have to maximize the information. I learned this when I was working for a very large company that did everything in PowerPoint or slides, like every single thing. Like it didn't matter. Most of them were not delivered. They were actually explicitly designed to be fragmented, recombined, and reshared by other people within the organization. And the whole, like, essentially they were like a wiki that everybody, no matter what level of executive you were, could edit. And so what I realized is that in that organization, your best bet is that if a bunch of people steal your slide, like if a bunch of people steal your slide, you are getting information.
Yeah.
Like you are winning, regardless of whether your name is on it, because eventually your name will get attached to it. But the point is the point is that you need to understand the organization that you're in, and you need to understand how that organization creates power, distributes power, values power. And you need to then look at what your role is. Like this is one of those things where, like, I can't emphasize enough, doing really great research is actually not what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is you're trying to create great outcomes for the organization. And good research is going to help create good outcomes. But the goal is the outcome, not the research. So, all right. With that, I think are we at the end?
Yes, we are. Where
Okay.
do we go from
That
here?
was an amen, actually. That was amen after what you just said.
And we are ready to talk about this and look at.
So there are a few things online. One was, person was just loving your concept of contract deliverable. Did you make that up, or is it something?
Was it a slide deck somewhere else?
Was it?
Daniel Irwin, do you want to ask? Do you want to have him go live or?
So I'll say I think we made that up.
We made it up, but
I don't know.
I mean, I have a PhD in social studies of technology, so I'm almost certain that I'm probably stealing a concept from some scholar somewhere and not attributing it properly.
But we do have these models compare with other models, and that we do all the time, and it is one of the ways of triangulating.
Yes, absolutely.
And that the coffee is that also,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, totally. No, this is one of the things that we recommend that everybody does in your organization is, and I've been talking about this for years, for really decades. Turn your research tools inside out and use them on your own organization. Look at what are the personas of the people who have power in your company. What is it that those personas value? How do they interact? What tools do they use? What are you do all of that work. Talk to the people. Talk to them about how they're doing it. What does success look like for them? What are the criteria for them that they need to know about this? use all of your tools as someone who's looking out in the world. You can do surveys. You know, we at Accenture, we actually did I led an R&D lab. Well, I led an R&D lab. We were like the least impactful, et cetera, part of Accenture. We did surveys. Like we would field surveys internally, completely internally. So you can do that.
You have a question from Sujana. Do you want to speak, Sujana, or should I say what you said?
Yeah, you can go ahead. Thank you so much for asking my question.
Say it.
Yeah, I was, you were talking about synthetic users, I'm sorry, synthetic researchers. And I was curious, what's the difference between having a synthetic researcher and an unmoderated study, which is kind of what we're already doing with platforms like user testing, where we already ask these preset questions to our users. So how are you differentiating between a synthetic researcher and an unmoderated study?
So I think that, I think that there's a spectrum of things. So, and the way that I would say is that those synthetic research tools, like unmoderated studies, have some amount of interactivity. Those synthetic tools, presumably, I'm just going to like say based on what I've heard them say, they have more flexibility. They can go in somewhat different directions. They can, and I think that's the main distinction. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question. I think as tools add features and functionality, kind of week by week, you might move to user testing, presenting a more kind of, we will be your researcher. We will create a simulated researcher for you.
Yes.
I think my sort of dividing line is that if there is a human who is essentially running the whole thing and the unmoderated platform is kind of following a fairly tight script that human has created, or at least
Directed.
Giving examples, yeah.
It's probably more augmented and less a replacement.
There was a question right over there.
Yes, you mentioned that there would not be so many senior researchers anymore, and the ownership of the research was essentially come to the early career ones. What do you think that does to the validity of the research? Because I mean, I've just suppose entered the field and I don't really know how to do well, and now I am in charge, and the responsibility is on me. How do you think?
Congratulations on both entering the field and being in charge. So that's great. I don't know, like
That's actually a very traditional path to take. Mike and I were talking about historically what happened is that people would join a startup, like a researcher would join a startup. They would be the first researcher. Maybe they are sort of the first all-purpose everything. And if the company grew, that person would grow with the company. And I think that's a very different setup. I don't know what company you work for, but it's a very different setup from joining like a mid-size or like a giant company and finding out that you're really trying to navigate this very complicated organizational structure, represent your work to people who you've maybe never met before, and you're trying to work it out.
Yeah. I mean, that's honestly, I've been in this long enough that that's how I started. Like the field didn't,
I did too.
Yeah, the field didn't exist when I was starting. So we were making it up as we were going along. That's why I wrote the first edition of the book, because I was like, all right.
So true story. When we were first dating, when Mike and I are married, we were first dating. I had my first job right out of a master's program in design. I was not a totally expert researcher, and I needed to do a bunch of methods that I had no idea how to do. You were like a couple of years ahead of me. The book was had just come out, and you were very embarrassed. You were like, well, here, you can have my book. So it seems a little egotistical, but here's a book you can read. And I was like, great. And I followed the instructions for doing focus groups, and it worked. And
Much to my surprise.
those are good instructions. Those instructions have lasted for effectively the 3 editions now, because they really, to a certain extent, and I think this is what we get to with the methods, is that the hard part, like the methods you can learn how to do. It's like one of our ideas about this edition was that it would be like how to cook everything or the joy of cooking, where, we all find ourselves in this position where like somebody asks us a question and I'm like, I mean, even now I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how to do this, to answer this particular question. I've never done this method before. I'll work it out. What's hard, and what I continue honestly to find very difficult, is the organizational politics.
Yeah.
So there's a question about cultural stuff. Indy Young, do you want to?
Indy, my former business partner, hello. We started a company together called Adaptive Path 25 years ago.
Hello.
Hi. You know all of these things, Indy. Okay, yes. What's your question?
Well, what is my question? What did it say?
Audiences that are Western privileged, including CEOs, board members, and specialized doctors.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic one. So Indy, you're asking about the sort of the other side of the hard to reach.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, the other side of the hard to reach, because hard to reach is at different levels, right?
Yeah.
Well, so I guess my question to you is, do you want, so that's, on one hand, a classic recruiting question, right? How do you recruit people who, for whom money is not an incentive, right? Like there's no amount of money you can pay a CEO to get an hour of their time to look at your thing, for the most part. Like, you're not going to get 10 of them back to back for sure. But I guess the other question is, so Indy, like when you're doing that, are you? Yeah, give me more context about that, because that is a classically hard problem. And AI can help with that because it can simulate a little bit of that. But what are you thinking?
I didn't really mean it as a question, but I have done it, and it of course depends on reaching out to your networks to reach out to their networks, and finding and negotiating with each individual what would be valuable to them in exchange. Most of the time, people want to know what the results of the research are, so we ask if we can give them that.
But I do think that's actually, you've pointed to a really important point to me about simulated users,
right,
which is the notion of frontier models that are built on stereotypes. Like the likelihood that a frontier model will really have deep insight into the rich inner life of Bill Gates is, I mean, it's possible, but there are so many more fictional portrayals. There's of really, let's say, high net worth people or very busy people. There's so much more fantasy. So when you ask a frontier model, my question is, are you getting the cultural imaginary of what we as a society think that person wants and dreams and fears? Or, well, actually, no, I'm not even gonna say that. I think that's what you're getting.
Yeah, I think that's what you're getting for sure. And what I'm after, as you all know, is cognition, which you're not going to see in the frontier models because it just doesn't exist in the data so much.
I mean, it depends on how you define cognition. Like,
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sat down.
No. Like,
but we have 20 people in the room, and I want to make sure some others get to ask questions.
Sorry, yes.
Hi, Andy.
Bye.
One of the things that kind of became, especially around talking about service design, and this is something that I've also chosen that pathway, going from industrial design to getting an anthropology master's, then realizing that any anthropologists who want to do work really should just be service designers, because it's essentially what anthropologists do in most organizations. We just don't talk about it in this way. So I'm like curious about if that role is done correctly. It does seem threatening, I think, to a lot of organizations, because it is looking at the, like, once you start taking that service and you start talking about how that service is delivered, and then we were talking about blockers in government for a while there, like that starts going up to positions that could be seen as threatening. And I've gotten myself into those positions by seeing too much of the system and trying to just do what's ethical, and that's always frowned upon. So like trying to figure out like what is that space? Like, is it ever going to reach a point where even though maybe it can't be super easily AI automated, it's too threatening to kind of allow that to have power in an organization.
Wow, that's a really good question. I think that, to be honest, most of what we do will not have power. Like when we think about real power to make things happen, locally speaking, I think often service designers have characterizing what one does as service design often gives you an easier path, because if you're looking at, say, breakdowns I did this once, I looked at how long it actually takes a provider of diabetes coaching services to sign up for a very specific health insurance payment program. And you can go to the various actors in that and say, hey, look, nobody is getting what they want out of this, right? We've looked at the data and there's a lost 3 months in there where people have signed up, providers have signed up, they're not getting paid. Nobody is getting what they want out of that situation. Let's get together and figure out how to cut that 3 months down to something less, something shorter. That was sort of how I worked through it, is from a service design perspective. I stopped calling myself in some ways a user researcher, because focusing solely on the user experience did not actually help me figure out the points of leverage where people who were not users, actors who were not users, were also not getting what they wanted out of specific transactions or services. If all I did was talk to users, it's like government research. If all I do, if I work for the government, is talk to the public, I'll understand what they see as the problem is, but I'll never actually understand what the internal solutions are that need to be put into place to make their service better, because I won't understand the bureaucratic mechanisms that screwed it up in the first place. And so you have to talk to both parties and think about surfacing what matters to both of them.
So outcomes, not deliverables again. So that's and positioning it. And if you find yourself, and I'll just say this, if you find yourself in a situation where you feel that the organization cannot do something ethical, you should not be in that organization. I have found myself there several times.
Nancy had a question over here.
I was surprised that, and maybe you said this before I got in the room, I was surprised not to hear anything about embodiment and the gap AI has with human bodies, right?
So I actually studied embodied cognition and worked with robots and embodiment before when doing research. I think that to some extent, from the perspective of kind of the corporate research and the interaction, the screen-based interactions that most corporate researchers care about, they're not really that embodied. They care about things that are actions on a screen. They don't necessarily already have in their models very much about the body that's behind that.
They should.
So
yeah,
maybe they should, but that's not the question that we're asking here.
It's a good question. I mean,
Yeah.
No, I think, for example, if you're talking about electric cars or self-parking vehicles,
Exactly.
Of
all
course,
those things.
that's of course.
Vending machines, anything.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
you get
The interaction design around hardware as well as software. You've got to think about the fact there are degrees of freedom of human movement that machines don't care about, but they all care about.
So they don't yet, they will soon. Like right now, you can already see multimodal models that can essentially fuse a bunch of sensor data. Instead of having a body, they can just look at a bunch of camera input and they can kind of understand how things are happening inside a space based on what's going on in the cameras. So they don't need a physical body to do experiments. They know what's going on. You're already seeing some of that. And so that's getting pulled into the frontier models increasingly. Now, again, does that equate to having a human body? Of course not. But what's the situation that you're talking about, and what are you looking
So
at?
I think, so for those of you who are not in the room, I was rolling my eyes behind Mike because
Thank you.
I'm very much on the, like,
Okay.
well, the sort of experiential side.
So it's not all cognition.
It's not all cognition, there's a lot.
fair amount of emotion and attitude in there.
Or even just, the way our bodies work is that most of our decisions happen before we think. So, that is always the problem with asking people to report on the self-report problem, is that people often, like they make decisions at a level before speech, and thus what they tell you is kind of a post hoc rationalization. There's also, I could argue that we have all of this work around taste. We have all of this work around touch. That being said, back in the oldie days, I spent a lot, since we're talking about like time and change and growth, in the 2000s, I swore I would never work on the web. I set up my entire career so that I could not do websites. And then when I went to work for the federal government, I discovered that the federal government mostly did not need awesome robots, or that the parts of the federal government that did need awesome robots was defense, and I didn't want to work for that. So I was going to have to make better websites and better forms. And to your point, Mike, like a lot of that, it is embodied in the sense that, for example, you have to understand, you have to have a conceptual model of a human that includes that human in a wheelchair to understand why a session length of like asking someone to input their birthday, like specific information that they need from specific documents within 5 minutes, or the entire session will close out and they'll have to start again from the beginning. It's just it's a terrible idea. It's a brutal idea. People's in wheelchairs just might have to take longer. And so,
Or any kind of mobility.
the issue, like there's so many things that lie outside of the conceptual model of human bodies that get implemented into even seemingly very non-embodied web pages that end up being incredibly problematic. That being said, I also look at it and I think, oh, for goodness sakes, if they had, if whatever, the anonymous designers who built this, the anonymous engineers had just asked the internet, like all they would have to do is type in, not even an AI, just a search engine, like characteristics of people applying for Medicaid. Like, I think somebody here worked for the AARP. Like, all you have to know is that by definition, most of your users will have some sort of slowing down of mobility or dexterity to know that maybe it's a bad idea.
Or degradation of vision.
Yeah, like there's so many things. So I sometimes do think that like a lot of the blunt force problems we experience are created by failure to ask the question or failure to consider what is outside, again, power, like what is excluded from the table as a topic of conversation.
And I'd argue it's actually not a problem with the frontier models. It's a problem with the, and I don't want to defend the frontier models, but I think it's a problem. It's a failure of imagination on the part of the people building the service in the first place. And that's the problem. It's not about like whether the frontier models are only model cognition versus.
We have another question over here.
So with the perspectives you have, rewriting the book and everything else, how do you see the curriculums at the university level changing for design, research, politics, communications, and beyond?
So you're looking at me.
I am looking at you.
Or you, yeah.
And I'm also thinking about it, but I'm tossing the question to you.
So I think that would be a great chapter for you.
So our book actually is used as a textbook in many places, or was, and probably will be again, because Elsevier is good at selling it there, or they were. So we have thought about it. We have we occasionally work with Stanford, Berkeley on things also. I think it's hard to talk about, because also when you're designing a curriculum, when you're trying to, You have to design it for the people who exist right now. And they have a very different perspective on a lot of this than we might. And so.
You mean the students?
The students, exactly. And so the students have, in many ways, essentially already an intuitive understanding of both what the things are, what's possible and what the limitations are, because they have spent a lot of time using this. What does that mean for what we teach them? I think we teach them to hustle. But you know what? They know it already. And so we don't need to teach them that. What we need to do is to essentially say, hey, and this is why there's one of the new chapters here is an entire chapter on organizational power. And that's why we put it there, is because that was a thing that was not talked about, but was incredibly important for people who were entering the workplace. And we were like, let's surface that. Let's make that super explicit.
Do we have another question?
I'm making sure that people get listened to.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna ask my question too, but yeah.
Hustling is, you know, to me at least, of course, they could be tough. It's more of a personality trait as well. Some people, I mean, I work with quite a few students and they just refuse to do that.
Well, interesting. Can you say a bit more?
They think that they have no chance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's honestly, I think we're in the middle of a transition. And so I think that there isn't a clear path in so many ways. And, you know, for students right now, if you're 20 years old, you know, so many things have changed since you were 10 years old. That, you know, since the first Trump administration, that the world seems entirely unstable. But I also think that those people find islands of stability, and they just aren't the ones that we had. And so they need to have tools and essentially be told that they have permission to use them to find those islands. And I know that's very vague.
Well, so actually, I'm sorry, I want to answer this and then we can go on, because I have a slightly different take. When we wrote, I think, either the second or third edition, I was really angry because I felt like there were a lot of UX research books that were essentially setting students up for failure in the workplace, that they were teaching a kind of canonical golden method of design, of human-centeredness that was not achievable realistically in the organizations that they would enter. And that it is always good to teach best practice, best practices. You always want to teach best practices. Yes. But one of the things we tried very hard to do in this edition, in the last edition, but even more so in this edition, is to try and say, look, we understand that you're going to have to adapt this on the fly. We don't know where you're working, but we want you to have, this is me being very honest, like I want people to have a good, sustainable working life. Maybe they're not going to call themselves a researcher, to your point. Maybe, they're not even doing this in tech. Maybe they're doing it for like a local community nonprofit. And odds are good they will not be able to follow that like beautiful double, the beautiful thing that a lot of companies taught and that a lot of companies advocate. And then I kind of want to believe in. So what do we do? I got to teach people to live in the world as it is and to figure out how to navigate through it. Onwards.
Can I do one last?
Oh, you started a.
I know, that's beautiful. So American design education has, at least in my experience, has a fault that it tried to teach, design is research, and it tried to teach these roles as savior roles. Like you're gonna come in and you're going to save the world through the careful laying out of dialogue boxes. And that was, to Liz's point, a total path to failure. If that's what you thought you were going to get.
Doesn't want to play gods, come on.
But I think it was, but I think it set people up for kind of disappointment rather than essentially saying, look, there are roles, there are positions, there are activities that you can do to both get ahead as a person who wants to have a career and help the world in the sense that you're helping the organization that you're part of, that maybe if you've chosen well is helping the world.
We have a question over here.
Sorry, that was just a rant.
No, that's fine. Well, my question slash statement is basically a reiteration of this is a concern about academic integrity. You know, like people, when the search engine started, everybody was concerned about it. And then Wikipedia, and then now AI. Like, what is academic integrity with AI? Is there any, you know, because I had students that blatantly would copy Wikipedia when I explicitly told them not to. And everybody knows that this is a problem in schools right now. Students are trying to run before they can walk. They are not doing mathematics by hand because they have the calculator. And you're seeing this problem of AI in a larger scale, that can be damaging, especially for life sciences, which is something a lot more sensitive than smartphones, right? So there's that barrier, the ethical and integrity barrier that we have with AI right now. So I want to hear your take on this because you're also academics, I think. So.
Well, it's somewhat academic. We sometimes do it. I will say, so I'll let you answer this question more because I just did a lot of ranting. We have a couple of kids. We have a 14-year-old in high school whose biology teacher, you're talking about the life sciences, writes their biology quizzes using ChatGPT, and the kids know it because they can tell the ChatGPT quirks, and they point out to her where the quizzes are wrong. And so it's not just the kids. That's all I'm going to say.
It's not just about kids. Like if this research, synthetic research, as you called, that can yield ambiguous and questionable results bleed into more important, not more important, but more sensitive subjects and sciences, where is academic integrity with these tools? You know, you might be developing a medicine totally based on AI that actually might cause more damage than good, for example.
So I'm not going to say the tools are neutral. They're not neutral.
Yeah, that's my
have
point.
Yeah.
But I think that's why we teach academic integrity. That's why we teach research integrity.
Well, to follow is a different thing.
Yeah.
That's
Well, exactly. But you can't necessarily, we've all watched Breaking Bad. You can make meth with a bunch of stuff that's you get from the hardware store just as much as you can use it to do something like, yes. So good.
Elizabeth?
Well, yeah, so
Sorry.
okay, it's okay. It gave me time to think. I think to your point, getting back to the sort of the sense of power dynamics, the more that we reward scale and speed, the more we essentially reward the logic that makes AI kind of, I don't want to say inevitable, but
Attract.
it becomes something that people, it's feeling like you need to use steroids as a professional athlete. Maybe you even know you shouldn't, but you feel like you're trapped. There's no other way out. And there's sort of, we all want to buck the system, but I think it's very hard to tell people to have a lot of integrity when they have, student loans and rent and so on. So the way that I try to think about it is, how do we set up systems that don't reward, that don't sort of enforce the kind of logic that makes faking stuff with AI seem like a completely reasonable trade-off? What that might mean is working for a smaller company. So, I made a trade-off to, well, you're giving me a look, but
No.
no, I mean, like, I made a trade-off to work in government and I make a lot less money and I work in a smaller company that does kind of ethical contracting in a specific way, and I recognize that is a bit of a privilege, but that's kind of how I chose to work with that particular problem of what I see to be individual people trapped in systems that make decisions that are overall not good for the world seem like their best and only choice. I don't know if I can do better than that, frankly.
So you had another question over there?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we're gonna take two more, and then I'm gonna ask a question or two, and then I think people are gonna have to go to bed at some point.
Yeah.
So my question was, what's on the slide, where do we go from here? And as somebody in the industry, you're saying that the UX research role might not exist like it is, and maybe it's not called UX research anymore. So how do you reposition yourself to fit into the industry? I know a lot of designers and product designers are calling themselves builders now, or like AI product designers, something so that you can be attractive to employers, I guess. So what do you suggest a researcher might do?
I'll tell you the kind of glib answer. Call yourself a product manager.
No, seriously, just do it.
Yeah, so
9/10 of the product manager, okay, that's not fair. A substantial proportion of the product managers I have worked with don't do what I expect for product management, or don't, like, we're operating in different worlds of what we think is going on with product management. So if you just decide to do your best as a product manager, that doesn't seem like it's going to be that much worse than a lot of other product managers I've met who are also seemingly making it up as they're going along.
yeah, product management is possibly the least well-defined job description in Silicon Valley right now, which means that it has the most opportunity on the one hand. On the other hand, it means that it has like so much like random weird noise.
That's what UX research was.
Absolutely.
Back in the day,
That's true.
Indy is on the line, like Indy can co-sign. Back in the day, because we're old now, Nancy, like you were here, like weirdos went into UX research. It was not a sure path towards having a great life.
Wait, you're looking at me?
Yeah, I am actually.
So we had a question over here.
Well, less of a question and more of a point to what you guys were talking about earlier in education. And me recently graduating last year, I have a little bit of, stuff to say about that. And my professors at Arizona State University, they are starting to talk about the fact that it's not this perfect thing you learn in fundamentals, and it's not going to look exactly like that. And in fact, one of the great books that I was suggested to read was the User Experience Team of One, a research design survival guide, because it specifically talks about how it's not like that. And yeah, so I just wanted to say it's starting to come around, but then it's also coming around as soon as it's changing again. So it's like,
Actually reminded me of something that I think is a skill that lasts, and maybe people will kind of nod along, or maybe they'll shake their heads. But one of the things that I think is so embarrassing and damaging about people who only write using AI is that it's not very good writing often, and that the foundation of remote work is good writing. Like, I will fight to the death for the fact that people who write bad pull request documentation are like deserve to go to hell. People who write bad PRDs are the doom of good product development. And by bad, I mean vague, I mean generic, I mean incomprehensible, I mean too long. Like there's a whole, and so I look at them and I'm like, man, nobody ever taught you how to write. I am so sorry. Or maybe you wrote this with AI and you didn't realize. I see a content designer looking at me like, you wrote this with AI and you didn't realize that it is not doing the job. Okay, like this is not good. I cannot work with people in a remote team who can't write a comprehensible Slack message.
Her entire team is remote.
My entire team is remote. Like,
And has been for 7 years.
things like speaking comprehensively off the cuff if somebody asks you a hard question in a live meeting, or writing a reasonable ticket that you'd think are not things that unfortunately we teach in computer science classes a lot of the time, and they really should be. Yeah. They should be things that we learn in basic, like, I don't know, intro to professional writing 101.
If that word claps.
If that were us.
So there's a incredible breadth of things you've talked about this evening.
Yes.
I'm very tempted to tell you that the difference between the dull of the robotics of 10 years ago and now is cars don't break anymore. And the best surgeons are now using Da Vinci. They weren't 5 years ago, right? So that has changed, and that probably will change also in the knowledge area, unfortunately. And that is that right now I mean, I know some professional writers that are, let's say, something like a quarter of US News and World Report's articles are now written with support of AI.
Yeah.
So it's a little weird time, but I really enjoyed your whole. This is the first. I mean, Jim Spore worked for me. Okay, so it's the first time I've really heard people talking about service design in a way that I kind of was buying into in a wonderful way and enjoying. And I want to, yeah, really excited about it. And I think that in some ways that's a more exciting story than the product manager, because it's about scenario. It's about the thing you keep talking about, the impact at the end. And I think that product manager, I've seen a lot of people just follow managing Slack messages.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to just tell a little story and have your response to it. And then you guys have the last word, obviously, but I had a class a few weeks ago with 14 to 17-year-olds. And I started off, as I typically do, saying, we're going to learn about what our idea is. How do you know you have one? What do you do to have one? What do you do to demonstrate it? And what do you do to present it? And by the end of 10 days, they had all made lots of things, and they had tested them. They blindfolded themselves for the blind ones. They'd taken them home and shown them to people. And these are kids, and their idea of where their careers were going and where their life was going was like, they're like on rocket ships. They had no worries about their being valid and their stuff that they were going to do being exciting. They were making extra things at night, I mean, and so on. So I think that there is new ways of exploring that we have now. And that I made a usability lab at IBM decades ago where I refused to put in a double silver mirror because I wanted all my engineers to be usability engineers. And I made them all learn those skills. And by putting it in one person, you end up understanding things like a service designer would view it from all these perspectives. And I think that's kind of what I'm dreaming is what you were talking about when you're talking about coming to a world where you're a service designer, not a usability researcher.
Thank you.
I don't know. I just made that up.
Yeah, I think it's not up to us. It's up to where things are going to go, and things don't necessarily go in the directions that we want them to. And I think that's. I agree. I think service design as a holistic synthetic in this form in the term of synthesis activity is incredibly valuable. But I'm not sure if it has the impact in organizations that you like.
Let's be real.
Yeah.
So actually what I would say, if I were talking to people, is go where you're wanted.
Yeah.
If the tech industry doesn't want you, I mean,
make oil.
Screw them. I mean, just to be real, like there are good lives outside of Silicon Valley. There are dreams you can have.
Real estate license, real estate selling. I don't money by selling expensive houses.
The federal government, people gave me the you have made an incomprehensible statement, Liz. And they said, but what about, all of those emerging technologies you wanted to work with? What about, interactive environments? And I was like, well, I like them. I still want to talk about them, but there was other important stuff that I needed to do. And I've made a really good, interesting, meaningful, intellectually challenging life for myself that does not involve me working for companies that are in Silicon Valley. And maybe
or having to justify your work within, like, this is there's a lot of Yes, I mean, this is the glib thing again, like the company is really like does evil stuff, but at least I'm,
On the trust and safety team?
yeah, exactly. I'm on the trust and safety team. Exactly.
Perspectives, right? You have Mike, who has stayed very much within kind of the world of the tech industry in many ways. And I'm obviously not gonna gainsay it, like, we're married and I think it works for you. And then you have me, who basically kind of noped right out and found a different path where I felt like the way that I wanted to work and the things that I wanted to do to the point of power were more rewarded. And part of that is because much of our government is using 2000s technology to solve 1990s problems. And a lot of the systems that I work on are excruciatingly old. And a lot of my wins are like really super minor, like changing an error message. But that's the trade-off I opted to make, I guess is what I'm saying. And getting back to the whole talking to students, I'm like, all right, like go where you can do the work that you think is going to do, and you're going to get paid a reasonable, like livable salary. And don't get too worked up about whether it's, a FANG company, because people get laid off from there all the time.
As the chart shows.
As the chart shows.
I want to say that Liz makes tiny little changes and people don't die.
Well, that's all.
It's great.
Yeah.
That is also true, right? Like the change is very small, but at the scale of like millions of people, it's quite
At
large.
this point, I don't think any of us want to die.
No.
And it's a very exciting conversation that we're having. And what I want to make sure of is that people that want to leave can. And it's possible some people will stay around and discuss things or eat cookies. And thank you so much. And I hope everybody joins us for some consciousness next month.
This is 100% the best follow-on I could think of to this conversation about AI and embodiment and research.
So thank you, everybody. And that concludes our program for